Ambassador Abravitova, my first question is following. What was the reaction and activities of Ukrainian community in the South African Republic when Russia has started a full-scale invasion of Ukraine on the 24th of February of this year?
Well, obviously, as all Ukrainians, not only in Ukraine but in all the world, we were shocked by the invasion, and we immediately started to react on different levels. We, as the embassy, on our level, but the Ukrainian community in the region was very active. Of course, there were a number of media engagements from all the sides. A lot of actions of protests were organized and have been organized so far. Numerous actions in front of Russian embassies or diplomatic representation through all the region. We did have the media engagements with different media from all the region, sometimes 10 times per day. So it was very widely discussed, and the Ukrainian community was very active in that as well.
You are working in the South African region for quite a lot of time. Why Africa is so important for Ukraine in your point of view?
Yes, Africa is and always was important for Ukraine, and it's not only with the Russian invasion when we realized that. There are different reasons and historical contexts to this. During the USSR times, Ukraine being a big part of the Union had a very strong relations with African countries. It was a big part of the liberation movements on the continent, providing different kinds of support, including training of the personnel of different organizations in Ukraine on our territory. Meantime, traditionally, hundreds of African students, if not thousands, were studying in our country. After the collapse of USSR and regaining of independence of Ukraine, I think we had a lot of challenges in maintaining our positions in African continent. And maybe this is how we have to look today at why some of the countries were quite reluctant on condemning Russian invasion in Ukraine. But we all remember that the war didn't start on 24th of February. And it's very important to analyze and to look at the support or the reaction of different countries in Africa on the annexation of Crimea, on the invasion on Donbass since 2014. Well, we obviously are very important part of agricultural supply chain for Africa, though the statistics of different countries were not really reflecting that directly. And for some of the countries, it was a big surprise when, without having a direct trade turnover with Ukraine in agriculture, they were so much affected after the Russian invasion in terms of their food security. So that importance is very obvious today for both sides, for African countries and for Ukraine, for the development of our relations. But I would say that why Africa is important for us today is that the values that Ukrainians are fighting for and protecting today are basically the values that Africans were struggling for and were dying for decades. That is why it's important to continue explaining the reasons, the context of Russian neocolonial aggression and its brutal war in our country.
Ambassador Abravitova, I saw your photo on Mazeppa Street in Durban, so it's a port in South Africa. Can you tell us, please, more about these connections between Ivan Mazeppa, who was a hetman of Vійсько Запорозьке, of Ukrainian Cossacks at the beginning of the 18th century, and South Africa?
It's very interesting because probably there is no direct connection, and Mazeppa was never being in South Africa or in Durban particularly, but because he was so famous and there was a times when Byron wrote a poem about him, which also was famous in different parts of the world. And one of the flagships of Great Britain were named after our hetman. And that particular ship going in the Indian Ocean through the bay that didn't have a name at that time was crashed. And that particular bay after that was named after Mazeppa. So if you look carefully at the map of the coast of South Africa on the Indian side of the ocean, you will see Mazeppa Bay. And that's probably how the street of Mazeppa appeared in city of Durban, which is in province of KwaZulu-Natal.
Let's continue this historical topic. So, how Russia became so influential in Africa during the times of decolonization? Why this period of 1950s, 1960s, 1970s is so crucial if we want to really understand the current level of Russian influence in Africa?
I think this is all about Russia's propaganda and Russia's way of stealing history from other partners, particularly from the USSR. This is the legacy that USSR had. Again, let me repeat myself, when it was helping to, particularly South Africa, to struggle with apartheid, but also to many other African countries to struggle with colonial powers and to help their liberation movements. So Russia is trying to keep the legacy of what been done by all 15 countries of USSR at that time under itself. And that's basically what it has been doing since 1991. So the some countries of the region would still feel very strong attachment to what USSR done for them through only Russian lenses, if I may put it that way.
Yes.
So
and
just to explain you that if you look, for example, at the independent Russia's trade turnovers, cooperation, different projects in African continent, you'll see that it is very modest. So it's really not about the economical presence or big project presence of Russia there, but more like the obligation that Russia is keeping the story to tell about of those countries to it for its freedom and democracy today.
So this summer we have seen a lot of very important phone conversation between African leaders and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, and almost all of them were done for the first time. and some of them were also with South African countries, for example, Zimbabwe, as far as I know. So, how do you see this change in paying more attention of Ukrainian diplomacy and Ukrainian leadership to Africa?
Well, it was not the conversation of President Zelensky with the Zimbabwean counterpart, but with Zambian. And you know that Zambia supported Ukraine during the votes in the United Nations organization. Yes, we did have through the African continent and particularly through the region conversations with the president of South Africa, of Zambia, of Mozambique and Botswana. This is the part of the implementation of Ukrainian foreign strategy for Africa. Even during the latest United Nations General Assembly, one of the three major points of our participation was to enlarge the contacts with the African continent and hold negotiations with African countries. So this is the very important to launch the dialogue on the highest possible level, and we will continue to do so. Meantime, it is important to develop relations on the parliamentary level, on the level of the ministries of foreign affairs. I'm sure that in the nearest future we'll see more and more contacts.
Also, the trip of Dmytro Kuleba, Foreign Minister of Ukraine, in Sub-Saharan Africa was announced. And why, I mean, how to activate the Ukrainian presence in Africa, I don't know, in political and on political, economic, and cultural level. How do you see it?
Well, the African continent today recognizes that Ukraine is not Russia. I think that Putin did something that he didn't anticipate many times, but this particular point, he also definitely didn't foreseen that he will raise awareness about Ukraine, about its place and importance in the world. And we are not only talking about our agricultural strengths. Yes, the president of Ukraine appointed his special representative for Africa and Middle East recently, which is also the part of the strategy of intensification of dialogue with African countries. But it's not something that you can do overnight. It is a process, and it will be the long process of establishing very strong and sustainable contacts that will bring our countries to the development of mutually beneficial cooperation. So it must be done on different levels, as I already said. Of course, the launch of the higher level engagements, like telephone calls or visits of the presidents, both sides. It is important. Meantime, the presence of Ukrainian diplomacy on the continent is becoming more and more crucial. And our presence on the continent is still very modest. You know that in some countries we still don't have ambassadors of Ukraine appointed. And maybe that will be the very next step that our government will undertake. Meantime, it is very timely now to organize the business missions to Ukraine and from Ukraine to African countries to investigate the sectors of cooperation that will be complementary for both sides.
And what concrete economic spheres are prior for you? Probably in South Africa region.
Well, it differs from country to country, but definitely we see a big struggle of Africa on the energy sector now. I think this is something that can be looked at, an infrastructure issue starting from aviation and concluding the maritime connections. That's something that we are already looking at. And of course, agriculture. That would be the three major that I would point out. IT technology is a very important one, and this is very much on the table of discussions between different sides during our conversations. African countries are showing very big interest towards IT technologies, and they do recognize how strong Ukraine today is in this.
I want to continue our conversation specifically about South African Republic. So, what is the public opinion among politicians and local populations about Russia-Ukraine war?
It's very diverse. The society of South Africa itself, it's very diverse. The political stance that South Africa pronounced and officially said to the world is a non-alignment position. Though the population of South Africa, on my humble opinion, since 24th of February, became more aware about the war and real reasons of Russian invasion. And we see more and more people of South Africa supporting Ukraine and being not indifferent. Here, maybe I should mention that even though we didn't receive any humanitarian support from the governments of the region, we managed and still working on different projects with South African private companies that been providing us with medical assistance, with certain protective equipment. And we are very proud of those not indifferent South Africans and people of Southern African region for their support.
Yeah, so, and how the public opinion in other countries is so different? Maybe Mozambique, Zambia, some other countries of the South African region. Like, what is the specialities of these countries? And by the way, how did you can organize the first ever cinema festival in Namibia?
Let's speak about first public opinion. It differs from country to country. Russian presence, diplomatic presence in these countries is very big and strong. That means that their propaganda is working very brutally for the public opinions in particularly Mozambique, Zambia, Botswana. There are embassies of Russian Federation in each particular one, and one of their weapons that they are using is obviously their propaganda. And the crucial moment in this is how impartial and free the media of the mentioned countries are. And I want to tell you that in most of the countries, media did pass this exam for the freedom of speech, and they really covering quite impartially the events that are happening, and they are questioning a lot of true and progressive questions to Russian propaganda. And I think that Russians, in this case, they are even helping themselves, because their propaganda is controversial from one week to another. Sometimes you don't even have to do a lot to unveil the fake news, because the realities, unfortunate realities that we see on the ground of Ukraine and that are reported by both journalists on the ground and also journalists here in the region, are confirming the brutal lies and fake news of Russia. Interesting question about Namibia Film Festival. Yes, it was done with the initiative and the support of Ukrainians in Namibia. Interestingly, that we don't even have the organized community of Ukrainians there. This is just a group of very dedicated patriots of Ukraine who are permanently or constantly living in this part of the world, who decided to raise awareness of Namibians about what is happening. And one of the soft power instruments is to show it through the cinema. The recent movies, not only documentaries that appeared after the invasion, but also those movies that were filmed since 2014, were having a big success and were attended widely. Meantime, this is not the only cultural and soft power event that was organized both by embassy and by Ukrainian communities. This October, we are having the film festival, European Film Festival in South Africa, that also will show our movie called Klondike. Then last year, our movie also was in the epicenter of attention of different film festivals. A lot of poetry festivals in Africa today are inviting Ukrainian poets, and our poets are participating online in these events. So yes, this confirms the interest not only of politicians to develop relations between Ukraine and Africa, but also interest from the artists to become closer.
South African Republic is, and South African region in general, is famous for the diamonds in the world, and there is a Kimberley Process, international involvement in the control of diamonds, that they won't be used in any financing of terrorism or war, and it will be some very important event regarding this international movement, and how Ukraine can punish Russia for manipulating this diamond topic along with Africa.
You know, this is the organization that was established to not allow to use diamonds in conflicts or to sponsor conflicts. That's why it's very crucial now to really make this organization for the purpose. And it's not only about participation of Russian Federation in this organization, but also about Belarus. We recently received the copy of the Belarus letter about the desire to become the Kimberley Process vice chair in 2023. And that means that in 2024, it automatically can become the chair chair country in the Kimberley Process. And I think this will be in the center of attention of the next session, which will be happening in Botswana in the beginning of November. If you look at the last preambular paragraph of the Kimberley Process certification scheme, you will read that the state sovereignty should be fully respected and the principles of equality, mutual benefits, and consensus should be adhered to. That means that any country that violates sovereignty and territorial integrity of another country cannot be a participant of the Kimberley Process. This is a very complicated issue because all the decisions in the process are taken by consensus. And this basically enables or blocks us from suspension of these countries from the process. And that is why a lot of partners of Ukraine today are raising the issue about the process of decision making and revision of this principle of consensus, especially in that times when one of the country parties to the Kimberley Process violates international law or sovereignty and territorial integrity of another country.
Thanks a lot, and maybe there would be some questions from the audience.
Yes, sure.
To ask Ambassador Abravitova. So I don't see questions yet. Maybe there will be someone. I want to ask you also about the cultural diversity in South Africa. How they have already revisited their colonial past and how they are building their society on a new multicultural level in the South African Republic.
So in the South African Republic, we are talking about the apartheid era and the peaceful transformation from that one into the truly democratic state. Yes, with huge diversity in cultures and peoples. And I think this is one of the brightest examples, not only of the peaceful transformation, but also the efforts in reconciliation after all those massive violations of human rights that were happening in the country. It's a very interesting case study when the country that called itself, and it is, the Rainbow Nation, that's additional time confirms how the the country perceives and understands its diversity, how it not only coexists in this diversity, but respect and support it. Just recently, last Saturday, we were together with South Africans celebrating the Heritage Day, and this is everything about this diversity and respect of each other in it.
It's really great, and and I want to ask you also about Ukrainian cuisine. Is borscht or other Ukrainian meal popular in South African region? Do they know about our national cuisine?
We do a lot to get this knowledge to South Africans, and they are very curious and adventurous, if I may say so, in trying the new things. That's why it's always very welcomed by them to admit, to adhere, and to try different events where we serve Ukrainian cuisine. And it's not artificially liked by South Africans. Unfortunately, we don't have yet any Ukrainian restaurant in Southern African region, but I think this is something that definitely will appear or come. But due to different Ukrainian festivals and bazaars that organized both by the embassy and by Ukrainian communities, people have the opportunity to try and to get knowledge about Ukrainian cuisine. We also quite often on the TV stations, on different cooking shows, or there are some magazines about the cuisines of the world where we letting people to know about our traditional food.
I live in Cape Town, so I've been following the conversation. There's one or two things I just want to mention. The first one is that we are very multi-diverse, both ethnic, culturally, religiously, and beliefs. But I do believe that because of social media, and there's a big disparity of people on social media and people who are not on social media, there's currently quite a strong support for Ukraine. And there's also an element to be taken into account that most people who are employed within the government sector or the civil service. So they cannot express an opinion that's outside of what government says. So what you see online is very different from what people actually express.
Thank you very much, Kaya. Thank you for this intervention and comment. Yes, the diversity is not the obstacle for recognizing the real values of humanity and democracy, and it will never be. And that's what all is about the previous African struggle during the years to be recognized as those nations that are with the same values and that are deserve the same dignified future. And that's basically what Ukrainians are protecting today in the 21st century. I do really, from all Ukrainians, appreciate your comments of support.
Can I just say one last thing? And
yes, sure.
This is a suggestion. The South African civil society is very strong. So one way is to pair the civil society in Ukraine with civil society in South Africa. That way, Ukraine will have both a governmental relationship and a civil society relationship.
I totally agree with you. And this is the way that our civil society is already looking at. I know that there are a lot of engagements. The embassy being the governmental representation is not really involved in that processes, but we are aware about different organizations that established their links, contacts, and having consultations because of the invasion. And again, you see, even in this, somehow Russians help us to come to these relations. And I'm sure they will be getting stronger.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can you compare the level of popularity of Nelson Mandela, the national hero of South Africa, with some Ukrainian maybe poets or writers or politicians?
Is that a question to me?
Yeah. It's a question. Yes.
No, I don't think that we ever can compare, because every person in the history of each particular country being a hero for particular nation has its legacy, has its input, and the supporters. You cannot compare this in other countries, because for us, our leaders will be important in the scope of our nation. What is happening today is that we see that Nelson Mandela, Madiba, who gave the world a real understanding of struggle for peace and for democracy, uh, out of the borders of only South Africa. Today in Ukraine, we have the leadership that also doing those important steps to protect these values, not only on the scope of our country, but on the global scope.
Also, I want to ask you about the climate change in Africa and how this green transition towards renewables could be the sphere of economic cooperation between Ukraine and the countries of South African region.
You see, we were in a very big trouble already with a lot of things before invasion started. We just were trying to get out of pandemics. We already saw the real face of climate change. We already realized the importance of the renewable energies, and the invasion just showed that those problems are not disappearing, and they still on the table. Meantime, maybe because of the blackmailing of Russia through the nuclear and energy resources, today the world will be more encouraged to really turn to alternative natural resources or alternative energies. That's why we have to see the positive in that. But all those issues with the climate change that we had, they need an urgent attention. And Russia today is only worsening this, because we cannot properly, and the world cannot properly address those issues, because we have to protect this land and these values that we discussed today.
Besta Abravitova, I want to say you thank you very much for having time to speak with us. Слава Україні!
Героям слава, дякую всім. Thank you.